Hey guys, Jeff here, and before we get to today's episode, I wanted to let you know about our Season 4 sponsor, Adventure is Out There Travel. If you're listening to this podcast, there's a pretty good chance that you're in the middle of planning your next Disney vacation right now. So why not make it easier for yourself? By working with an Adventure is Out There travel agent, you'll be having an experienced vacation planner doing the heavy lifting for you. Adventure is Out There Travel specializes in making sure your entire group gets to experience the type of activities they want in order to make your trip even more magical. Whether heading to a Walt Disney World vacation in Orlando, flying west to Disneyland, or floating on the high seas in a Disney cruise, Adventure is Out There Travel can help you plan the vacation of a lifetime. Visit adventureisouttheretravel.com for your free, no-obligation quote today. Now on with the show.
Get ready for your weekly dose of pixie dust with Disney Coast to Coast.
Hey folks, and welcome to Disney Coast to Coast, the ultimate unofficial Disney fan podcast. I'm Jeff DePaoli, and today on the show, I have a very special guest returning by the name of Don Hahn, who you may have seen on the show previously on episodes 236 and 237, but this time he's here to talk all about the live-action Beauty and the Beast film that he was an executive producer on, so let's just cut to that right now. Thank you so much for coming back to the show.
It's my pleasure.
This is now your second interview, but third time on the show.
Wow.
Because
I'm a regular.
You are, pretty much.
I'm like Joey Bishop on The Tonight Show, which for the only people above 70 years old will know that reference. But
I got the reference. It's
okay, good. Thank you.
But yeah, so you like to talk a lot, and I'm happy to listen to you talk.
I beg your pardon.
No, I love it. I love it. So we actually had to break that first interview into 2 episodes.
Oh, wow.
So it's
great.
Wonderful.
Great.
I love it.
Happy to be here.
But we're here to primarily talk about Beauty and the Beast, this live action version that we got, which you're an executive producer on. First one you're a producer on. So let's just kind of start with what's the difference? What was your different role with this one?
Wow. An executive producer is probably a little more on the fringes of the production. So as a producer on the original Beauty and the Beast, I was the first guy on and the last guy off. I was there every day, making sure the movie all came together in every iteration. When you're executive producing something, it means I was in on the early script version of it, reading the early scripts, and then I go away, and I often just eat the food at the craft services table, and then come back later and look at multiple screenings and give notes and that kind of thing. So there are... when you have somebody like Bill Condon directing a film like this, it's really, live action is very much a director's medium, and you want to stay out of their way and give them the resources and tools that they need. And there's no studio like Disney in terms of giving those resources to a director. So this is really so much about Bill Condon and his vision for the movie, building on something that I did with Kirk Wise and Gary Trousdale, back 25 years ago.
So you were on set for it, though, yes?
I was never on set.
You were never on set for this? Okay,
No.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Where did they shoot this primarily?
London.
Which
describes why I was never on set.
Exactly. You lived there for a couple of years, though, for Roger Rabbit, right?
I did, yeah. I lived for 2 years on Roger Rabbit, which I loved. It's a great town. We still have to go visit there because it's such a changing, vital, interesting international place, and it's just one of my favorite places on the planet. But no, during filming of this, which was in 1975, it was a long time ago because there was so much special effects done in the last 2 years and so much animation done. I can go over there and stand on the set and watch, but there's not a real compelling reason for me to go there and stand on the set every day because it is a director's medium and the director is the one driving the set. Yeah,
I did notice that Tom Schumacher was also an executive producer. Anybody else from the original film that came back for this?
No. I think there's a ton of the original film obviously in this, and so the work of the story department, the work of the directors of the original film is really evident on the screen. And so it's really just me that made the trip from the old movie to the new movie. And the studio was really generous to me. They really solicited my involvement, which they didn't have to do. They didn't have to have me on the movie at all. And they were really open to having me there to give notes and guide things and tell them if I hated things and all that stuff. So, and they actually listened, which was crazy.
Was there anything you hated that ended up getting cut because of it?
There were parts of the movie that weren't working in early screenings. And by that, I mean, they weren't disastrous because there was the original movie to go off of, but there were parts of the movie that needed polish or help. And some of it is because it wasn't quite done yet. Some of it is because there's some new song moments that needed to be integrated into the movie a little bit more. And I'm a huge fan of Alan Menken and especially of Howard Ashman, and the ability to kind of follow Howard's lead. Howard taught us about telling story in songs. That was his huge gift to all of us. Is songs aren't just something where you stop and take a bathroom break in the middle of a movie. There's something where you go and tell the audience what's going on, and characters break into song when they can't not do it. They're so moved by the romance or the fright or the emotion or of that moment in the movie that they have to break into song. So a lot of what I wanted to try to push into the movie was staying true to that, staying true to what Howard wanted. And of course, Alan is right there on the same page. He's a brilliant musician.
Yeah. I would be remiss not to mention that we are in your studio right now recording this.
We are.
Surrounded by, are these your paintings behind us?
They are. Yeah, I paint.
If you're watching this on YouTube, you can see it. If you're listening in the car, well, go to YouTube later and check it out. But yeah, there's unbelievable. I mean, you're seeing a small section of this room. There is just art everywhere, and it's pretty incredible. And I do wonder, obviously you're a painter and an artist, but were you a musical theater fan before you got into this world of animated musicals?
I never thought of myself as that, but I guess I was. I played in a lot of pit orchestras. I was a drummer and a percussionist. I was a music major in school. And all through college and high school and into my even early years at Disney, I would play in orchestras for musicals, for whether it was Pajama Game or Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum or whatever it was, or even operas. And so I was around it a lot. I was never an actor. I was never somebody who wanted to be up on stage, kind of like now. But I was always somebody that was really happy to be, slightly underground and hovered over a pair of timpani or some xylophone or something, playing orchestra parts. So I was around it a lot and really got used to it and loved the music. So yeah, I guess I am a fan just by virtue of being around it growing up.
I've got to say, I saw the movie yesterday, the finished film. I have a bone to pick.
Yep.
You made me cry quite a bit.
Me personally?
No, not you personally. The movie, oh my goodness.
That's emotional.
Really, take a guess what moment, really did it for me.
When the objects say goodbye to each other at the end? Yeah.
I mean, my assumption is that my emotions would be toward Belle and Beast, but it was really that moment of the objects, because something happens that really doesn't happen in the animated film. We actually see them, at least not that I'm recalling, we actually see them become fully just objects. In the animated film, we see them transform.
It doesn't happen. It happens in the Broadway stage show. There was this really great breakthrough in the Broadway show that Linda Wolverton wrote also, where they are progressively becoming stiffer and more of a clock, more of a candelabra. And so you see the curse drain the life out of them. And so that was picked up by this movie. And when you get to that scene at the end, it still is very much about Belle and the Beast, but there's this added dimension of them having to say goodbye to each other, and then the objects say goodbye to each other, and these kind of playful characters that are just tireless, rooting for the Beast to break this spell, suddenly give up. Yeah. And that ends up being really emotional for the audience, not surprisingly, because there's plenty of vested interest in Belle and the Beast, and their chemistry is pretty amazing because of the actors in the movie. But I love that part of it that's definitely different than the animated film, where the objects actually show you that they're kind of giving up because there's no hope. There's absolutely no hope. And that's just great storytelling. We had a great story team on Beauty and the Beast that really was able to kind of dig into all these corners of the story. And I think that's what helps to support this movie. And then they did some wonderful expansions on that story in this movie.
You mentioned in the musical is kind of where that idea began. And I thought that was, because I remember, I was a kid when the musical came out, and that was my biggest question, is how are they going to justify these objects being life-size?
Yeah.
And that was such a brilliant idea to make it gradual, them turning into the objects. So I was very happy to see that stayed with the film. Really good. But speaking of the Broadway musical, there was a lot of music in the Broadway musical that was written just for the Broadway musical that didn't end up in this film, but new songs were written for this film. So how did that conversation, was there ever conversation of the musical?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's some terrific songs in the musical. Great Beast soliloquy that he sings in the musical. But I think a lot of it is that the director and the team on the live action movie didn't want to just make this kind of a Velcro movie with it, where everything that had been done before kind of sticks to it, and you have to drag along all this luggage with you. And I think that was the right choice to say, let's take the songs from the original movie and then invent some new moments and some new songs that expand on the story and put some more flesh on the bones of the story. So that's where you get Tim Rice, who's brilliant, coming in and giving us some new lyrics to expand on Maurice and Belle's relationship, to expand a little bit on Beauty and the Beast's relationship itself, and really give you those extra moments that are slightly different than the Broadway show. And I think that's it. I mean, going to the movies, you want to see something that is a fresh look at a story. Mm-hmm. Still the same story, still the same thematics, but just a new angle on it. And I think these new songs are terrific.
Yeah, Evermore was breathtaking.
Yeah.
And that was the song that, I'm not going to lie, when I first heard that there was a new Beast song in place of If I Can't Love Her,
yeah.
I was kind of upset because I love If I Can't Love Her.
I think the audience would agree with you. It's still a really popular song and a standout kind of song from the stage show. But Evermore just shows that there's an opportunity to retell a story. And that's what our job is as storytellers, is to, we retold the Beauty and the Beast story in 1991 that had been told for 2,000 years before us. And now I think you see Bill Condon and his team retelling it again. And that's what we're supposed to do. That's the fun of making movies, is not just telling stories, but looking at them from different angles and retelling them.
Yeah. Now, Disney has had quite a success with these live action versions of some of their classics, but this seems to have gone way above and beyond. I mean, literally, I saw it at the El Capitan, which is, if you don't know, in Hollywood, it's a great theater that Disney owns. You should check it out when you're visiting. But I had to buy tickets weeks in advance, and I barely got a ticket to this film. So, I mean, were they expecting this at all? This is
it's the Hamilton of animated movies.
It really kind of is. I mean, you don't see this except for with superhero movies.
You really don't. And it's, we were watching the box office over the weekend, and it was starting to outperform some of the Pixar movies, and then it was starting to outperform some of the Marvel movies, and then it was starting to outperform the biggest movie of this time period, which was Batman versus Superman.
Yeah. And
when it surpassed all those and became the biggest movie of all time in this time period, it was really amazing and humbling and head scratching, because you never know. And I think it's largely the movie and the story, but there's elements of nostalgia that people want to bring their kids to this. And I think it's also the times. I think a lot of it is people are anxious and they want to go to the movies, turn the lights out, and have a story that's reassuring, and a story that's about love, a story about not judging a book by its cover, and a story about kind of a love conquers all story. And we live in really complicated times, have for many, many years. And it's just a chance to have some willful suspension of disbelief and go into a place where there are going to be some happy endings.
Yeah, now you also worked on Maleficent, which was taking Sleeping Beauty and reworking that, but that was a very different retelling of the story. Was there ever any consideration of doing that with Beauty and the Beast?
I don't know that we would retell it in such a radical way as we did with Maleficent. Part of Maleficent, the idea of it originally was, here's the most beloved, if that's a word, Disney villain. People love Maleficent.
Yeah.
And to be able to say that in the original movie, in Sleeping Beauty, which was 1959, there was no real backstory for her. We never knew where she came from. And also that movie is very much about Aurora, but Aurora in a 1950s way, where the heroine sleeps through the entire movie until her man shows up and says, you can start your life now because I'm here. Well, that's not a story I want to tell my daughter. And that's not, I think it's not a story that any of us want to tell our families in 2017. So that's where Maleficent became a story about a very strong female character who has a very checkered past and ends up doing some of the most noble things possible in expressing her love and forgiveness to Aurora. And that became a really great theme. And what makes fairy tales work is not just their stories, but their thematic underpinnings. So to be able to say Beauty is about not judging a book by its cover, or Aladdin is about being yourself no matter what your background is. And to be able to look at those underpinnings, I think it's why people come back to these stories again and again and again. And whether they're Bible stories or Aesop's fairy tales or Grimm Brothers, those are the stories that give us our ethics. And those are the stories that give us affirmation of what life is. And that's why we want to go back and revisit those and go to the theater and see those again and again and again.
Yeah, plus nostalgia is at in my lifetime anyway, at an all-time high, I feel like right now. And it's, something so nostalgic about Beauty and the Beast. My generation grew up with it. It's undeniably one of the best. And it's really, the live action film surpassed my expectations, and I really went in with high expectations.
Yeah.
So I'm really happy and thrilled with the final product.
Yeah, me too. And it's humbling that people say that because there was no guarantee.
Yeah.
And I think there's a risk involved in retelling these stories, and Disney's doing quite a few of them. And you could criticize it and just say, oh, it's just a cash grab, it's just this and that. But it's not. A cash grab would be doing a $50 million movie that just kind of hustles out there with the title. These movies are labored over and debated and written in a way that can build on the original fairy tales that we all grew up with and feel strongly about. So they're really good movies. And to have the audience say that has been the best part of this last weekend, to say it doesn't take a thing away from the original fairy tale and the original movie 25 years ago, but it builds on it, and a lot of people just feel like it's their favorite movie, which is incredible that they would say that.
I said, as soon as it ended, I said, this is the best movie musical I've seen since Moulin Rouge, which was 2001?
Yeah, which was a really great musical. Moulin Rouge was spectacular, and we're all fans of that movie because it was brave. And I think there's a lot of nostalgia, but a lot of creative bravery in this movie from Bill Condon, from Alan Menken, from Tim Rice, from Emma Watson, who she didn't have to do this movie. She could do any movie she wanted to. She passed up La La Land to do this movie. Yeah. But she's great in the role.
The whole comment on, this isn't just a quick money grab. Mm-hmm. As you said, I do feel like a lot of people feel that way about Hollywood in general these days. There's a lot of sequels. There's a lot of remakes. And in my opinion, Disney has found that sweet spot of getting that nostalgia remake sequel thing and making it art. Mm-hmm. And I feel like that's what people are upset about, is when the art isn't there.
Yeah.
And the art is absolutely there in these films. So
it is. There's nothing new under the sun. And in a way, every movie has an element of remake in it, an element of something familiar. That's why we like movies. If you look at a movie like, there's very few truly original movies out there, and they do exist. But when it comes to these movies that Disney is doing, yes, they rely on some nostalgia. Yes, they rely on previous material. But they also rely on a lot of modern craftsmanship, modern technology, and good old-fashioned storytelling. And the audience is smart. The audience is really smart, and they can smell a million miles away if it's a true, just a cash grab or something that's misdirected, or a film that just was a train wreck. People know that, and if they don't know it, they can read about it online. So I think, if anything, you have to work extra hard today to try to turn these movies into something that is enjoyable for the audience, redeeming for the audience, and just make a great movie. And I think the other thing that Disney has is a culture of that. And other studios may. I don't know other studios that well. But when you look at Disney Animation and the films they've made, like Frozen or Wreck-It Ralph, they have this tradition of debating their movies, and it goes back to Walt Disney. It goes back to Walt and his guys, and they would rather debate the movie before it opens than to settle for something and have the audience debate it in the press. So there's this culture of, call it perfectionism, call it good storytelling, that exists back to Walt Disney's days, that's still very alive in movies like Beauty and the Beast.
Yeah, I have some friends that work on the current films, and it's unbelievable where they'll come home from work and be like, we threw it all away. We're basically starting over. And that's something that, what a luxury the Walt Disney Company has to be able to do that.
Yeah.
Because, everybody's got a budget and has to deal with that. But, to give their artists the ability to do that, I think is one of the reasons why they're so successful.
It is a luxury, and it is a business. And to work for a company that realizes that it's short-sighted to accept something just because it's done, or just because you ran out of time or money, is really unusual. And so to have a studio like Disney saying, yes, we have budget restrictions. Yes, we're a publicly held company, but we also have a kind of a unspoken contract with the audience that these movies have to be good.
Yeah.
And you have to live up to movies of Walt Disney, whether they're Snow White or Pinocchio or Cinderella, and the movies of Jon Favreau, Jungle Book, those kinds of things. You have to live up to those things. And that's where Disney is in a league of its own, I think.
Yeah. Now, were you involved with casting at all for the live action film?
Not a lot, no. I would look at casting lists as they came through, and a lot of it is hinged on Emma Watson. A lot of it is when you get a lead like that has to carry the whole movie, it has to be somebody who is recognized by the audience, but also has to be a terrific actress. She has to be able to step into the shoes of Belle, this beloved character, and yet make it her own. And she did. She was respectful to the original movie, but I'm happy that she was able to make it completely her own and not have to totally, just totally mimic the original movie. She didn't, and she made it special in that way. And I'm a huge Kevin Kline fan, so to have him as Maurice, Belle's father, is great. We worked with him on Hunchback of Notre Dame as a voice.
That's right.
He's the most funny, warm, interesting guy on the planet, I think. And I'm also a big PBS fan. I'm on the PBS board out here in Southern California, and because of that, was a Dan Stevens fan. And I always thought Dan had a ton of potential and a ton to give as an actor. And the fact that he signed on was a real plus for the movie. Because he brings, he's a character and an actor that maybe people don't know. They do now, but
Downton Abbey, ladies and gentlemen.
Yes,
Downton Abbey.
It's exactly. But Downton Abbey fans knew him, and now Beauty and the Beast fans will know him as this wonderful, warm, vulnerable character that he plays.
Yeah. So now to something a little controversial.
Oh, good.
The decision was made to make the character of LeFou gay in this film, and I'm wondering how that came about, why that came about, any response to the controversy that there's been because of this?
Well, let's see. I will try to speak from the heart, because there was never anything in the script that said, LeFou's gay. That was never implied or written or any of that. I think the actor that played it was very just had fun with it. Fun with it in a way that I think of in kind of a way that like Milton Berle used to dress in drag and run around like a silly person. In the last dance scene at the end of the movie, spoiler alert, he dances with one of the other guys in the castle for about 3 seconds on screen in a way that's totally benign and totally doesn't affect the audience at all. So I think in large part, a lot of people who had never seen the movie picked up an internet story from the director, who did do an interview where he did say that LeFou was gay. And I think that was inappropriate and an exaggeration.
Yeah.
And I love Bill Condon. I think he's a brilliant guy, but it's moot in this movie. And I think those of you who've seen the movie would be hard-pressed to kind of say there's a gay moment in this movie. It doesn't. If it exists, I think it's under the guise of inclusion and under the guise of a movie about not judging a book by its cover.
Yes.
It should be completely acceptable.
Yeah.
It's not Disney promoting gay lifestyle, as I've read in some places. It's really just saying it's a movie about inclusiveness.
Yeah, the interesting thing about when I read that moment, I actually saw the film really far in advance. Like one of the, I think I was like the first test audience for the film. And I was like, I don't remember that from LeFou. Like, I don't remember those moments.
I honestly didn't remember it either. And I thought, there's scenes where the wardrobe, even in the original movie, where the wardrobe dresses up a couple of the bad guys in drag and stuff. But, that's because it was funny.
Yeah.
So we never sat around 25 years ago or even now just saying, hey, everybody, let's sneak a gay character into a Disney. That's sophomoric. We wouldn't do that. So if the audience interprets it that way, that's fine. I also feel like it's 2017. I'm respectful to people who don't appreciate or want to show their children a gay lifestyle. Beauty and the Beast is not a movie that shows the gay lifestyle. And if it did, I don't personally think that's a bad thing.
Yeah.
I feel like it's a movie totally about inclusion. And if there's a essence of that for 3 seconds on the screen, fine.
Yeah. It was shocking when I read that. I was like, and then of course now having read the article and then seeing the film again, I said, okay, there's a moment. I get it. But if nobody wrote that article, I would have never, even the finished film, I would have never. It's
part of living in the internet age where there's just a lot of information thrown around. I kept telling people, why don't you wait until you see the movie?
Yeah.
And but some people just like to be seen to be ahead of the curve and like to be seen to be the spokesperson for a movement or for a particular element of the audience. I think the audience is extremely smart. I think the audience is extremely open-minded, and you see that in just the amount of people that came out to see it this weekend.
Yeah, for good reason, because it's phenomenal. But you, of course, have the authority on the live action and the animated film, being one of very few people who worked on both. Tell me something that you think the live action film does better than the animated, and the animated does better than the live action.
I actually love how the live action film put a little more into the story of Belle and her mother and her backstory. The chance to go explore that, and I won't tell you how it explores it, but the chance to go explore that and find out a little bit in a really sweet way who Belle's mother is and how much love her father had for her mother and how much of Belle's mother is in her as a character, I think is really great. And so I think the elements like that of being able to flesh out the story a bit more were interesting and appropriate and terrific. Some of the new song moments, the song between Maurice and Belle, I think is really sweet. And Celine Dion sings it in the soundtrack. And we kind of discovered her. Chris Montana, our music supervisor, discovered her when she was a French-Canadian singer who could hardly speak English. And we needed somebody to sing Beauty and the Beast. And he said, well, there's this girl, and she's just, her career hasn't broken yet. Her name's Celine Dion. And we all thought, well, God, why would you get a French-Canadian singer to sing this? And we're going to have to pair her with somebody that we know. And so we paired her with Peebo Bryson to sing that original song. Anyway, so some of those things are terrific about the live-action film.
So how about the other way? Is there something that the animated film does that you think it does better than the live-action film?
Wow. Animation is a medium of caricature and a medium of fantasy. And there's something about what you can do in animation with a pencil and a piece of paper that is magical. The fact that you can breathe life into characters that don't exist and have the audience laugh and cry with them is still magic to me. Yes, you can do that with actors in front of a camera, but to do that with a pencil is a magic trick, bar none. So to be able to look at some of that and look at some of the fun that animation can have, I notice it in the objects. The objects, out of necessity, have to feel a little more earthbound in a live action film. There's gravity. There's no gravity in animation. You can have Cogsworth leaping up in the air a mile. You can have Miss Potts hopping around the kitchen and singing and dancing. And it's colorful and it's full of fantasy and life. And that's something, oddly, that animation does really, really well. And just the color and fantasy of animation, I think, is terrific. And there's some nostalgic bits about the animated film, too, that are less about better or worse than the live action movie, but just more about how groundbreaking it was. How the use of computer graphics, long before there was a Toy Story or anything else, how that was working its way into animation and Beauty and the Beast, and how it was accepted by the audience and the Academy and that kind of thing. Those are wonderful first-time, once-in-a-lifetime things that the original Beauty did that are really cherished by all of us that worked on that movie.
This is as you were speaking, I just had a question pop into my head that is a little weird, but do you ever get tired talking about this? Because you seem to be very giving. I mean, I'm certainly not the only interview you've done about this film, and I'm sure you're hearing questions and talking about things you've discussed before.
Yes, we are, but I don't get tired about it, and I don't know why. I think partially is I feel like there's so much of the story to tell, and I was the only guy there, and I feel responsible somehow about talking about that. Not that I'm better than anybody else or that I have any particular insight that's better than anyone else's. But for example, I've worked really closely with Howard Ashman on this show. And I'm working on a documentary right now about Howard Ashman. And it's something that is so close to my heart. And I feel like, well, he's a story that needs to be kept alive to the point that I want to tell his story on film. So I want to talk about that. I want to talk about Howard's genius of being able to communicate narrative and storytelling in his songs. I want to talk about Alan Menken's genius for melody. I want to talk about Kirk Wise and Gary Trousdale, the directors who Kirk was in his 20s when we made this movie. I want to talk about Joe Ranft, who was in our story department, who went on to work on a lot of Pixar movies, or Roger Allers, who was the head of our story department, who went on to direct Lion King, and Brenda Chapman, who was in our story department, who went on to direct Brave. Everybody in our story department, Chris Sanders, who went on to direct Lilo and Stitch and How to Train Your Dragon, they are all directors now and leaders in the animation industry. And at that time, they were kids in a warehouse.
Yeah.
And so that's a great story to me. That's kind of a Shakespearean story about the last will become first. The kids that got kicked off the campus into some warehouses make some films, not just Beauty and the Beast. I mean, we stand on the shoulders of Little Mermaid and so many films that Walt Disney made, but we're able to express themselves in the way that these movies do. And I talk about it because it's part of my life, but I also think there's a an important story to tell everyone about creative persistence and creative heroism, for lack of a better word. We have plenty of role models in sports. We have plenty of role models in politics, in public life. We have very few artistic role models. And to me, people like Kirk Wise and Gary Trousdale and Alan Menken and Howard Ashman and Glenn Keane and Andreas Deja are artistic heroes and should be talked about in those terms.
And add Don Hahn to that list.
I'm their front man, yes.
It wouldn't be done without you. So it's really it's incredible. It's lovely that you continue to speak about it, continue to make documentaries. I actually had a note about this at the end of my notes, but since you mentioned, I'm going to jump to it. I'm so insanely excited for the Howard Ashman documentary because, as I've mentioned to you before, Waking Sleeping Beauty, a film by Don Hahn, is one of my favorite documentaries of all time. Love it. And the fact that you're going to continue making these documentaries, one about Howard Ashman, is just incredible. I want as much information as you will give me about the Howard Ashman documentary.
Well, in a way, the Waking Sleeping Beauty experience kind of opened me up to the idea of doing a Howard documentary because there's quite a bit of Howard in that show. But Waking Sleeping Beauty became, rightly so, about the renaissance of animation at Disney. There's a whole nother story to be told, again, about artistic heroism, about this guy from Baltimore who goes to school at Indiana University, who's an outsider to Broadway. He didn't go to Yale. He didn't step into the Broadway stage from a position of authority or privilege. And he starts making Broadway shows in a 99-seat theater, the WPA, in the rattiest area of downtown Manhattan in the early 80s. Then does Little Shop of Horrors that becomes this huge hit, which leads to working with Marvin Hamlish on Smile, which becomes a huge crash and a disappointment, which makes him leave Manhattan in humiliation almost, and flee to Los Angeles, where he starts writing songs for Disney Animation and revolutionizes Disney Animation. So it's this really, it's a fairy tale in a funny way about this guy who has high aspirations, who gets kicked in the face a couple times, and then ends up writing these classic stories, collaborating on Aladdin and Little Mermaid and Beauty and the Beast. And at the height of that, gets diagnosed with AIDS and dies at a point where he doesn't even see the finished Beauty and the Beast. That's a heartbreaking story, but it's a story of writing some of the most favored, beautiful songs, even today, even this last weekend, that people will be singing all summer long while he was on his deathbed. That's a story to tell, and that's what I'm doing.
And I mean, he was clearly a friend of yours as well.
Yeah.
And it's got to be kind of heartbreaking to go back and tell that story as well, I would assume.
It is, and we're very careful to be really journalistic about it. Right. We've talked extensively with Howard's sister, with Bill Lauk, Howard's mate, and to be able to try to really capture who Howard was, because I knew him professionally, and he was the consummate professional. But to try to capture his personal life and try to capture what he was going through personally while he was writing these songs is important to me. To try to capture the Disney side of the story. Disney was ahead of its time in terms of treating people with HIV with incredible fairness and generosity at a time when people were afraid of it, when the government itself wasn't talking about it. So those are important stories to tell. So yeah, it's difficult to revisit those, but in a funny way, documentaries can breathe life back into characters again. And it's gratifying to bring Howard back to life for a while here and to share his story with people.
Where are you at in that process?
We have a rough cut right now. Our editors put together a terrific kind of long version of it. In fact, when we're done talking, I will take you up and show you a little bit of it. But you're sworn to secrecy.
Okay, I won't say a word.
I really will. I'll show you some of it.
I'm beyond excited.
And it will be done later this year. And then we'll start doing some film festivals. Very much like Waking Sleeping Beauty, we'll do film festivals, and eventually it'll be available out there for everybody.
It's really, it's unfair to say that so many people work on all these films, but Howard Ashman is just one of those people that if he wasn't part of Little Mermaid, like I can't think about what would have happened with that film. Like I don't know. I don't think that film clearly wouldn't be what it is.
Right.
And then let's face it, that was really the start of that phenomenal renaissance.
Yeah.
And so it's like, would Beauty and the Beast really have become what it? No. So it's amazing to think that one man had such a huge part. He certainly didn't do it all,
right?
But he had such a huge effect on those films.
I think so. And there's no discounting Ron and John on Little Mermaid, or Kirk and Gary.
Yeah.
And yet, Howard's the one that taught us how to tell stories in musicals. Howard's the one that brought Alan Menken in. Howard had been working with Marvin Hamlish, and Jeffrey Katzenberg said, well, who do you want to collaborate with? And he went back to an old collaborator they'd had a huge hit with, Little Shop of Horrors, and said, I want Alan Menken.
Yeah.
And Alan was thrilled to have another collaboration with him. So Howard was responsible for so much of what we think of as Disney now, not just in terms of the 90s, but in terms of today, because we're going to be seeing and hearing his lyrics and words in a lot of these movies coming up. And his shows like Aladdin are a huge hit on Broadway right now in a way that Howard never knew when he was alive.
And one of the great things about the Broadway show, I feel, is some of his music that was deleted from the film has been worked back in.
Definitely so. Definitely so. And even the Broadway show Beauty and the Beast had Human Again in it, which is a song we couldn't work into the original movie. So it's a chance to revisit Howard. And luckily the press and the stories about Beauty and the Beast this last week opening, a lot has been said and written about Howard. And I'm really, really happy about that because he is at the center of a lot of this movie.
So obviously you've got many other projects. You've got the documentaries. You're constantly writing books. You have a new one coming out?
I do, and I've been working on this one for, oh my gosh, a couple of years. It's called Yesterday's Tomorrow, and it's about mid-century Disney. So it's the Disney I grew up with in the 60s, and if I started looking at that period of time thinking, oh, it was kind of a magical time in my life, and I went to Disneyland a lot and certainly saw all the animated movies. But if you look at what Walt Disney was doing in the 50s and 60s, he was at the forefront of television. Mm-hmm. Disneyland was funded by ABC, which most people don't know or think about. ABC, Western Publishing, he was at the forefront of publishing. Disney was working at the World's Fair, working with the city of New York and corporations like Ford and Pepsi, to be able to do pavilions there. While he was still alive, he is envisioning the Florida project and Epcot and Walt Disney World in Florida and walking the land in Florida in 1966 before he passed away. And he was developing a ski resort in the Sierra, and he had a bowling alley and a sports complex in Denver, Colorado that nobody knows about. So he was this Renaissance man doesn't discover it. He was out of control. And he had built this team of men and women who could support all of that. So when he came back from a meeting and said, we only have 6 months, but I want to do a pavilion for Pepsi, and I want it to be a boat ride, and I want it to be the children of the world singing. He could look to Mary Blair, he could look to Alice Davis, he could look to Mark Davis, and they would do it. He knew his people would get it done.
Yeah, there was a level of trust between, and also I always, whenever I speak to anybody that knew Walt, it always seems like they just wanted to please him.
Yeah.
Which is such a weird thing. Like, it's wonderful, but want to please your boss that much, I think is rare. And I think I think that really was the magic, right?
It was. I think he was a lot more than a boss. Yeah. And there were certainly some people that didn't get along with him and probably hated him as much as loved him. But the loyal people that really stuck by him through everything wanted to please him because I think he really saw this kind of childhood in all of us. Mm-hmm. And the ability to try to recreate that spirit of childhood in everybody, whether you're 6 or 60, was something that was unique. I mean, here's a country that had been through World War II and was coming out of the war, and before that was the Depression, and before the Depression was World War I. So Walt Disney himself had been through this long drought. Now, all of a sudden, in Southern California, it's optimism, it's sunshine, it's possibilities, it's the land of Hollywood and hot dog stands and the first freeway and now the first theme park, the first TV station, all that stuff was happening. And Walt Disney was the center of it. He was the center of space travel. He brought Werner von Braun into his studio and said, hey, I need some television series on space travel. Anybody else might have just blown that off and done some kind of kids thing with a flying saucer. No, he brings in the guy who's the head of the space exploration group at NASA and says, no, let's do something that really envisions what space travel is. And to the point where President Eisenhower brings those films in and starts showing it. And it ends up with eventually President Kennedy saying, oh, let's go to the moon. He never said because Walt Disney said we could, but it was kind of because Walt Disney said we could, know? So that kind of personality is amazing. That's what my book's about, is to try to wrap your head around that. And it's selfish that I write books like this because I don't write it because I understand it. I write it because I don't understand it. And it gives me a chance to dig deep into those topics and learn more about them, and then hopefully share them with the audience. So that'll be out around the holidays this year.
Great. And how does that come about? Is that it's your idea initially and then you bring it to Disney Publishing?
Yeah, there's an amazing person, Wendy Lefcon at Disney Publishing, who's responsible for more Disney history books than anyone, for greenlighting them and making them and giving birth to them. So I've known Wendy for 25 years, and I come up with the idea and I take it to her. I say, I don't know if you want this or not. Sometimes she doesn't. Sometimes I'll take her a book and say, oh, this isn't quite right. But she jumped on this one and said, oh, yeah, nobody's written about this. Nobody's really captured this moment, and was really, really supportive. And now 2 years later, we're just putting the final captions on the photos and getting ready to send it to press.
Are there any ideas that they weren't interested in publishing that you went ahead and did anyway, and self-published or went somewhere else? There have been. There was one book called Drawn to Life by Walt Stanchfield, who was my mentor and kind of mentored all of us in our generation at Disney Animation. And the reason Disney itself didn't want to publish it is it was too inside baseball. It was very much about the craft of drawing for animation, and it just didn't seem right. It was too much of almost a textbook, and that's not what Disney does. Disney is publishing as more of a general audience book. So for that book, I went out and found another publisher that was willing and able to publish it, and that's ended up being probably the best-selling thing I've ever worked on. Wow.
Because students of animation love it for its insight into drawing for animation.
Interesting. Now, I guess it's on topic. It's interesting because so much animation is done in computers today, and that book that you wrote was about hand drawing, I assume. How much of that apply? I'm not an animator by any means. So how much of that is applied in the computer technology that is used today?
Quite a bit. You'd be surprised. I think one of the things that Disney Animation does so well is they use some of their masterful hand-drawn animators like Eric Goldberg or Mark Henn to do drawings for the computer graphics guys, because sometimes with computer animation, it's basically an elaborate marionette show, and sometimes the marionette puppet or the rig in computer graphics doesn't bend and stretch the way that you might want it to. So by having animators being able to do a pencil drawing over the top of that, they can actually push poses into a place that might be uncomfortable for the CG model, but is appropriate for the performance of that character. So they use hand drawing a lot to push those characters, and that's where a book like that or that topic is still relevant. So there's always something to be learned from hand-drawn animation. It still exists. There's brilliant hand-drawn animation being done today in Japan, in Europe, in Ireland. And I think also at some point Disney will come back with a hand-drawn film.
Do you think so?
I do. I know, John Lasseter and Ed Catmull, the guys that are in charge of animation there, love it.
Yeah.
And it's probably in the same realm as stop-motion animation. Every once in a while, it's great to do a Nightmare or a Frankenweenie. But I think when the time's right and the story dictates it, I think they'll jump on it.
What do you think makes the story dictate it? I'm personally a huge fan of Princess and the Frog, and frankly think it's been too long since we've had a hand-drawn animation feature. But I don't know, what do you mean when you say if the film dictates it?
Well, it's a really graphic medium, which means it tends to be more heavily designed. If you think of a movie like 101 Dalmatians, that was a piece of mid-century modern art. Just as Sleeping Beauty was. It was a highly stylized piece of art. You see that in computer animation, but not as much. So there's a graphic, flat quality to hand-drawn animation that is unique. And if there's a story that happens to cry out for that, where its location or its plot takes place in a world that could use that, then it's appropriate. There was a movie a couple years ago called Secret of Kells, and it was a takeoff on the Book of Kells in Ireland. And that book is really stylized in its flat illuminated manuscripts. And so to make that movie in a hand-drawn medium was totally appropriate because it was a graphic style. So I think it's really looking for those ideas that scream out for a graphic style that'll start to surface as a hand-drawn animated film.
I would love to see that again.
It's really good.
Now, I want to bring up a couple of films that you worked on that I did not mention on the last show. We hit the big ones, but some people wrote in and they said, I want to hear about Atlantis. I want to hear about Emperor's New Groove. So what exactly was your involvement with those two films and any fun stories to go along with it?
Well, I'm really proud of those films. I produced Atlantis, and I think Atlantis really was a time and place where we were trying to stretch our creative muscles a little bit. We had done plenty of musicals by that time and loved them and have so many good stories about those, but we were trying to kind of get into a realm where we could do an adventure story. We all love 20,000 Leagues. We all love Journey to the Center of the Earth. We all love Jules Verne. We all love Raiders of the Lost Ark. So why not do that in animation? Animation's not a genre. Animation's a technique. So you can do different genres in animation. And I think that's where Atlantis came from, to do a real Journey to the Center of the Earth, 20,000 Leagues kind of story. It also gave us a chance to do this really fun, diverse cast of characters. So, we had one of the first African-American characters, one of the first, really literal Hispanic Latina characters. And to have this ragtag crew of people that were trying to make their way to the center of the earth and save a civilization was just incredibly fun. And we went to the Carlsbad Caverns and went spelunking, which was cave exploring, crawled on our stomachs through lava tubes, and did everything we could to immerse ourselves in the world of the underground, which is immense and scary. So we could put that in the movie. And then we patterned so much of our character designs on the great Mike Mignola, who is, those of you who don't know him, he's the kind of father of the Hellboy character and many, many other things, and one of the great, great comic artists of our time. And he consulted on the movie. And it was just really an attempt to break out and try something different. And really proud of that movie. And the same with Emperor's New Groove. Mark Dindal, who directed that movie, has made what has become a cult classic. There's a few movies.
Yeah.
And I can still go to Comic-Con or to D23 and people go, oh, Lion King, yeah, that's okay. And I'll say, and this happened last weekend, I did an event for Beauty and the Beast. And then the person introduced me and said, oh, and he also executive produced, this movie about llamas and that and people came unglued. So if you're of a certain age and grew up with Emperor's New Groove, it's a cult movie. It's like the Rocky Horror Show now.
That and Goofy movie, I find.
The Goofy movie too.
Oh my, which is really, really good. Like, I love the Goofy movie.
I did this thing at D23 a couple years ago.
Yes.
And it was a panel, and the great Bill Farmer was there. And we thought, we'll get a couple hundred people. 900 people showed up. Yeah. We had to turn away people. And
I was turned away.
It was, I'm sorry. And it was a rock concert. I often thought you could sell out the Hollywood Bowl and do a Goofy movie night.
You totally, if you had
a Powerline concert and he showed up at the D23 event. If you had a Powerline concert at the Rose Bowl or at the Hollywood Bowl, sell out.
Yeah, it's really incredible. But you're right, Emperor's New Groove all the time. As I said, people wrote in after our first interview and were like, why didn't you talk about Emperor's New Groove? And
that's a movie that went through a lot of changes, and talk about throwing stuff out. I mean, got to a certain point, it was thrown out, and we had to cut a bunch of songs by Sting.
You know the Sweatbox, right?
I know the Sweatbox.
Okay, I've seen the Sweatbox.
Have you seen it?
I have.
I have too.
I know I'm not supposed to have, but...
Oh, why?
Well, it's not really available.
It's not available, and it's a bootleg copy, but it's a really good movie. It's really good.
It's a documentary about the making of Emperor's New Groove.
Yeah, it was made by Trudy Styler, Sting's wife. And Sting, we cut a lot of his songs, and he resigned, and then we had to talk him back on, and his songs are great. And in the end, he was a great collaborator, but it was one of those roller coaster rides where it ended up just being this irreverent comedy and probably the funniest Disney animated movie ever.
Yeah, it's so funny. I need to talk about this just because it's attached to a film that I'm obsessed with.
Yeah.
You worked on Tummy Trouble.
Yeah.
Which was, I mentioned it because it was shown before Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, which I have a really, really strange obsession with.
That is strange.
I love that movie so much. Do you love that movie?
I like that movie. I'm not sure I love it.
I love Rick Moranis.
Well, that goes without saying.
I'm like in that field of like dying for Rick Moranis to come back and do something.
Well, let's do that.
Done. Shake on it.
Yeah, I'll make some calls.
Okay, let's do that. So in any case, I love Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. Tummy Trouble it was shown before that film, and I find it interesting. You were a producer on it, correct? I find it interesting for a couple of reasons. Number one, you worked on Who Framed Roger Rabbit. So this was your return to Roger in a time that I know sequels were trying to be made but never were and all that. But also, it was at a time when shorts really weren't shown before animated features. So how did that come about, and any memories of Tummy Trouble?
Well, I think when Roger Rabbit came out and was a hit, we were thankful. And there was talk of going right into a sequel. And yet we knew we wanted to keep those characters alive for the length of time it would take to make a sequel, which could be, 5 years.
I see.
And so there was, we pitched a lot of different ideas, the first of which was Tummy Trouble, and then there was Roller Coaster Rabbit and some other ones, and started making those shorts mainly to keep the characters alive in the audience's mind. And then the sequel never quite came together. It came so close so many times. And then just over a period of time, it was clear that it was never and probably will never come together.
Fan fiction, folks. It's just
and that's okay. Sometimes some movies are not meant to be remade or sequels to them. I just really believe that. And Roger is one of those. I think it just stands on its own.
Yeah. You're also very involved with the Disney nature films. And I love these because they kind of go back to Walt's True Life Adventures is how I think of them. But those films must take many years to shoot. So, I mean, for a while they were doing one every year. They were releasing one. And I mean, what is that? How long do they shoot? Because we'll see these baby animals grow up.
Yeah, on Chimpanzee, we were, when I say we, I wasn't there. The cameraman was in the field for 3 years shooting that movie. And so many things happen. You have to go out with a script. So there's not a literal script with lines of dialogue, but there's a continuity of what should happen. And in that story, it was about a mother giving birth to a little baby and following that baby growing up. But within a few months of starting to shoot, the mother went away one night and was killed by a leopard. Oh, wow. So you go, well, there goes our movie. And there was a thought for a while about maybe just shelving it. But then an extraordinary thing happened. One of the alpha males in that tribe of chimps started to take interest in the cub, and that never happens. If anything, it's the mothers that might take interest in the cub, but they have limited resources. They're trying to raise their cubs. So the alpha male comes in and starts to let this little cub ride around on its back and kind of validates this little cub to grow up in that tribe and accepts it. So now all of a sudden you have this new story that you could never plan for, and you just go with it. I always say it's like whitewater rafting. You just go out, you're prepared, but you have to go where the river takes you on those movies. Yeah. The new one coming out, Born in China, is brilliant, and my friend Ray Conley produced it along with some really great filmmakers. And it does take years, 3 years, 4 years, because you are following animals that are like snow leopards that are hard to photograph. They're hard to see when they're standing right in front of you, much less photograph. So it just needs a lot of time to be out in the field, find those animals, and follow their story.
Great. And before we end here, I just want to mention, you mentioned earlier you're on the board for PBS in Southern California. And right now we're going through a bit of a time with the funding for the National Endowment of the Arts possibly being pulled, which funds a lot of PBS, correct?
Yeah.
What can our viewers do to help this situation? Because it's something that's near and dear to my heart as well. And so I'm curious.
Yeah, no, I appreciate your asking, because if funding gets pulled from PBS as is proposed in the latest budget draft, it's not only difficult for local stations, it's catastrophic. Because those stations take a lot of money from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which is congressionally funded. So if that funding goes away down to zero, shows like Sesame Street and anything from great performances, operas, cultural programming that everybody benefits from, programs like that could potentially disappear. And what you have to realize, which I'm sure your audience does, is there's about 40% of the public that is able to see PBS that is of an economic strata that doesn't get cable TV because they can't afford it. So they get broadcast PBS, and they also don't go to preschool. They can't afford going to preschool. So 40% of the audience that is watching is getting their preschool content of curriculum and socialization and those kinds of things from shows like Sesame Street, so that when they do go to kindergarten, they're ready for it. And so that cultural contribution of PBS alone should be enough to sustain it and expand it, if anything. And that kind of educational value is so valuable, not just for preschools, but also for adults. The nature programming, programs like Nova, even fun programs like Antiques Roadshow or This Old House, programs like Downton Abbey that are just enriching and good drama, Masterpiece Theater, great performances. Those are all things that are culturally enriching to us as citizens of the world and citizens of America in particular. So that's the kind of thing that that really should be sustained just as an act of our humanity to each other. Like Churchill said, what are we fighting wars for if it's not for the arts? Why? To have more wars? No, we're fighting for our humanity, and our humanity is very much about the arts. So there's a million ways to help out. One is to help your local station. So wherever you're listening to this from, is to be able to tune in, and whether it's volunteering there or whether it's giving to that local station, donations or putting it in your will or whatever it is, those local stations live in great majority over that kind of donation. It's not commercial TV. It's not supported by corporations. It's not supported by companies that want you to buy something. It's supported by viewers. And the same is true with NPR. National Public Radio is in the same jeopardy. So if you listen to NPR, if you love PBS, just turn to your local stations and support those the best way you can.
Great. So guys, go support that. Make sure you go see Beauty and the Beast, because Disney needs more money too, right?
I have no comment on that.
And go read Brainstorm by Don Hahn. I love that book. Go see Waking Sleeping Beauty by Don Hahn. So good. Available on DVD. And other than that, I think that's going to wrap it up here. Are you good? Anything else you want to add?
Let's go upstairs and watch some Howard Ashman.
Yes, thank you so much for coming on the show again. Guys, of course, an episode of Disney Coast to Coast would not be complete without some trivia, so I'm going to cut to that right now. It's trivia time! Hey folks, and welcome to today's trivia time with my friend Jeremy from the Mad Chatters podcast. Hello, Jeremy.
Hello.
Today we have trivia based on one of my absolute favorites. If you listen to the show, this comes as no surprise. Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. And I gotta tell you, I'm actually really nervous about this, because although I've seen the film about 1 billion times and know a lot about it, I don't necessarily know the minutia, and I'm pretty sure you're really gonna try and stump me on this. And I don't want to let anybody down.
I gotta tell you, I do not worship at the altar of Rick Moranis as you do. But as a child, this film, we owned this on VHS, and I wore it out. I mean, I watched this over and over and over again. So Honey, I Shrunk the Kids does have a very special place in my heart, and I'm glad that I can share that with you.
I am very happy to hear that. I didn't realize that, because you give me a lot of crap for loving Rick so much, but I'm glad you love at least one of his works as much. Well, maybe not as much as I do, but quite a bit.
No, I don't think I can ever love anything about Rick Moranis as much as you do, but to each his own.
Well, why don't you ask me your question first?
Okay, so one of my favorite parts about Honey, I Shrunk the Kids is the amazing animated opening.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the opening credits, I guess you could say, and it's really well done and just fascinating. And so my trivia question to you is, which Pixar director helped animate that opening?
Well, Joe Johnston directed the film. I don't. It's not Joe Johnston, though, is it?
It is not.
A Pixar. Pete Docter's too young. I don't think it's Pete Docter. Lee Unkrich. I'm running out of names here. I don't know. Who?
Andrew Stanton.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah.
Oh! Now that you say that, like, I can visualize seeing his name in the opening credits of Honey, I Shrunk the Kids.
So, yeah, I found that kind of interesting. Of course, did he do other animation for Disney at that time, or was that even Disney Animation that did that opening?
To be honest, I'm not 100% sure. I know that it was a pretty big deal, that opening animation, and was very happy to see them repeat that tradition in Honey, I Blew Up the Kid. Very sad to see it be taken away in Honey, We Shrunk Ourselves. But this is not my trivia, but related to this whole animated beginning. Do you remember the short that came before Honey, I Shrunk the Kids?
Of course. That was my first exposure to Roger Rabbit.
Okay.
And Roger Rabbit at the time had a little bit of that edginess and adultness attached to him. Mm-hmm. And things like The Simpsons come to mind. And I was not allowed to watch The Simpsons as a child. So we always watched the Roger Rabbit short. Was it Tummy Trouble? Was that
yes.
What it was?
Yes, indeed
we always
it was.
watched that when Mom wasn't around, because we didn't want her to get upset.
So yeah, that was shown before the movie, which was kind of a big deal at the time, because shorts were not a normal thing at the time. And then I believe it was on the VHS, I remember, not on the DVD, unfortunately, and sadly it's still not available on Blu-ray. So
really,
yeah, don't even get me going. One of these days I'm going to show up at a shareholder meeting and be that guy. And start reading the statistics of 1989. Honey, I Shrunk the Kids was a bigger hit than The Little Mermaid. Blah, 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 blah. And be like, you need to put this on Blu-ray. Yeah.
Well, so, every year somebody shows up and asks about Song of the South, so you can show up every year and be the tummy trouble guy.
I'm gonna be that crazy Honey I Shrunk the Kids guy. Yep. Fun. Well, let's get to my official Honey I Shrunk the Kids trivia question for you. Honey I Shrunk the Kids was not the original title of the film. It actually had 3 other titles before they chose that one. Do you have any idea what any of the titles might be?
Okay, hold on. I know these because I looked them up.
Okay.
In my research today of Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. One was Teeny Weenies.
Very good.
And I only remember that one because I thought it was so funny. Like,
It's terrible. It's a terrible name.
Title, Teeny Weenies.
Yeah, right.
Anyways, so many jokes I could make right there, but I won't.
Just leave it alone.
The other one was it like groundbreaking? Ground something?
Grounded.
Grounded. I was way off.
No, you were pretty close.
Which again is like has so many levels to it. I feel like that was a good title because they were like closer to the ground, and then the neighbor boys get grounded. So like it's all tied together. Yeah,
sure, but it doesn't have the same ring to it as Honey I Shrunk the Kids.
No, Honey I Shrunk the Kids definitely rolls off the tongue a little more.
Do you know what the third one was?
Oh gosh, I don't remember it at all.
It's The Backyard.
Oh, that's why I don't remember it because
I'm definitely happy they ended up with Honey I Shrunk the Kids. Actually, originally Honey I Blew Up the Kid was going to be called Honey I Blew Up the Baby. And I always found just the term blew up is so interesting.
Yeah.
Definitely sounds like you expect to see body pieces flown around. But
definitely bring a different kind of a mindset to the film. I don't think that would go over in today's world.
Yeah, probably not. You're probably right. Anyway, thanks so much for coming on the show, Jeremy. Like I said before, you can catch Jeremy and his friends on the Mad Chatters podcast, which is at madchatters.net.
Bye.
Thank you once again to Don Hahn for coming back to Disney Coast to Coast. It is always appreciated and always a pleasure talking to him. Hope you guys enjoyed the interview. And of course, connect with us between episodes. All of our links can be found at DisneyCoastToCoast.com. Have a magical week, everyone. Bye.
Thanks for watching Disney Coast to Coast. Have a magical day.